Ian has got the pithiest comment so far on a text. What the F is he going on about? Well, I have three experts with me to answer that question, so I don't have to. Several of you are saying this is like the Eurovision Song Contest. Simon Marks, I imagine you have some pithy words of your own to tell us.
I do have some pithy words of my own, Ian. I mean, first of all, it's a bit of a win for the UK because, as you heard him announce there, he's going to tariff the UK at 10%, but he then went on to say that 10% is the baseline for any country. And if you looked at that chart that he was holding up there, and I've never been in a situation where I was literally sort of freezing the video here to try and read what the chart said. But some of the other countries that are tariffed at 10% include Singapore and Chile. By contrast, I think Israel is being tariffed at 17%. So, you know, this is the lowest tariff that the UK could possibly have expected to face, given that he's implementing across the board what he calls reciprocal tariffs. And he says the the US is charged an average of 10% by the UK, and he's charging the UK 10%. That's in contrast to tariffs of 20% on the European Union, 34% for China, 26% for India. So the government can, I think, in London, take comfort from the fact that it's done as well as any other country has performed in this extraordinary series of numbers that President Trump has been reading out. He is absolutely determined that this is going to result in money pouring into the United States, not just in the form of tariffs, which of course will be passed on to American consumers and will lead to rampant inflation here, according to every single one of America's Nobel Prize winning economists, but he's also convinced that this is going to lead to a manufacturing boom in the United States because foreign exporters will realize that if they want to avoid the tariffs on their products, they should simply come in and invest in manufacturing plants in the United States, create jobs here, build their products here, and then evade the president's tariff regime altogether. I think the key line that we heard from President Trump in the rather lengthy build-up to all of that was this one. In many cases, he said, the friend is worse than the foe in terms of trade. And if you listen to what he was saying there about South Korea, about Japan, about the European Union, I mean, those 25% tariffs are going to have a devastating impact, for example, on Germany's automotive sector, because he's keeping the 25% tariffs in place on foreign-made cars and car parts manufactured outside the United States and sent to the United States. You know, he has targeted friends of the United States with as much vigour and animus as he has targeted foes of the United States. And there will be those, I think, in European capitals who say we really do now have to recalibrate our relationship with the United States on the basis that as far as trade is concerned, President Trump is literally saying there, the friend is worse than the foe. But I think in London tonight, and I know your other guests in the studio in London will opine on this, I suspect they will be breathing a bit of a sigh of relief that it's only 10% for the UK.
Simon, thank you. Natasha Clark, she never opines. She gives considered analysis, don't you, Natasha? But as Simon said, Downing Street is going to breathe a sigh of relief tonight, aren't they?
Yeah, I think so. And so that's 10% on everything, the minimum amount that we've seen of any of these tariffs that's been announced this evening. There will be 25% on cars specifically as well. But yes, Downing Street, I think, will be really relieved at that. And I think it will just go to show that that relationship that Keir Starmer has built up with Donald Trump does mean something, and they will be able to point to that and say, look, we and this relationship that we've got is actually going to benefit us. It's going to give us some relief from these tariffs. And you only have to look at some of the other people on that list, including the European Union, who have promised, of course, already to put retaliatory tariffs back on to the US, that he's treating them, you know, despite what Simon just said there, that the friend is treated worse than the foe, actually. In the case of the EU, in the case of Canada, he's treating them far harshly than he's treating us. So
what was it, the state visit? What did it?
Potentially, yeah. And, you know, we do know that Donald Trump does put a lot of emphasis on things like this. And he told me when we were at that press conference they were working on this economic deal. He said that Keir Starmer was a tough negotiator, that he was worth every penny that we were paying him. And we know that the UK government have had a bit of a flurry of diplomatic activity over the last week. They've very much bit their tongue. They've kept their cool, calm heads, is what I've been told all week, that they're going to wait and see what happens. And that's obviously, of course, a bit of a holding line for all governments. They all say that. Let's wait and see what happens. But this is actually a moment where it's a little better, I think, than many people were expecting. So, yeah, I think that Downing Street will be a little bit happier than maybe they would have been earlier today. The idea that a lot of people were thinking it was going to be 20-25%, especially the point that Donald Trump has made about VAT, right, about it being 20% and that being an unfair tax that the US has to pay on their imports. The fact that he's going down to 10%, that's a pretty good deal that we're starting
also
to
Also shows he doesn't have a clue what VAT means, but there we go. 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to give your reaction to what Donald Trump has just said. Shankar Singham is here, Chief Executive of the Trade and Competition Policy and Law Consultancy company Competeri. Shankar, is that what you were expecting, or from a United Kingdom point of view, it's on the good side, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it was more or less what we were expecting. So he waved around a book there that is the National Trade Estimate, which is the inventory of foreign country trade barriers. And if you look through the book, you'll see a direct correlation between the size of a country's entry and the tariff that they've received. So he's obviously looked at three buckets. One is how open is your trade regime, and then this talking about regulatory barriers, and behind the border barriers, how competitive is your market, how well do you protect property rights. And the analysis that USTR has done is to look at all of those areas and to come up with an evaluation of the sort of tariff effect. And we actually did an exercise on the G20 where we looked at this, and actually we got very similar numbers. The UK did, in our exercise, came in at 7%. Europeans came in at 22%. So you can see the process that they've gone through. I think he said two things that are important going forward. One is if you want to lower the tariff that you're paying, then you need to either manufacture in the US, that if you can, but more importantly, I think lower the barriers. That's, lower the tariff, lower the barriers. And some of these developing countries that got very hard hit, they got hard hit because their tariff structure is very high. It's relatively easy for them to lower the tariff. It's going to be much harder for the EU to eliminate the regulatory restrictions and so on. The UK, I think we've got a good chance now of a deal, but I think it's a pretty cold evaluation of countries' barriers and distortions, and I don't think there was much more to it than that. I think the next phase, all your relationships, all of those things, that becomes really important.